Final payment. The bell above the door gave its soft, habitual chime as Nolan Pierce stepped inside the diner. It was the kind of sound that didn't startle anyone, just folded itself into the low murmur of conversation and the clink of cutlery on ceramic. The air smelled like burnt coffee and warm syrup, edged with the faint tang of old fry oil that no amount of scrubbing ever seemed to erase. He stood just long enough for his eyes to adjust to the dim light before he saw her. She was in the booth, their booth, third from the back, by the window with a crack in the corner of the glass that caught the morning sun like a spider web. Madeline Landry. Maddie. Her laugh was the same, soft at first, then growing like she expected the room to lean in and enjoy it too. She tilted her head toward the man across from her, fingers curled around a mug, her nails painted the same coral shade she used to complain chipped too fast. The man was younger, maybe by a few years, with the kind of easy posture that suggested he didn't think too hard about much. Ryan Cole. Nolan remembered him from a town council mixer once. Affable, vague, the kind of man who mistook charm for character. On the table between them sat 2 slices of peach pie, steam curling up from the lattice tops like something rehearsed. Maddie leaned forward, fork in hand, and fed Ryan the first bite. Nolan watched her lips move, a joke or a story, probably both. And Ryan laughed too loud in response, the sound pinging off the tin ceiling like it didn't belong there. Nolan didn't sit. He didn't move past the threshold. Instead, his hand slipped into the inside pocket of his coat and closed around a folded piece of paper. It was worn at the corners, creased into neat thirds, the kind of document that had been opened and smoothed flat too many times. An old insurance policy. Group coverage, employer-sponsored, dependent benefits listed by name. Her name, still active. He didn't pull it out. He just felt its weight, the texture of the paper against his fingers. Then he let it go. June Hart caught his eye from behind the counter. She was refilling the sugar caddy, her movements slow and deliberate, the way someone moves when they've worked the same job long enough to make it look like choreography. June didn't smile, didn't wave. She just nodded once, sharp and spare. Nolan nodded back. The booth hadn't changed. The vinyl was still cracked near the edge where Maddie used to rest her heel, and the Formica tabletop had the same worn patch where his elbow had always landed. There was a small, scuffed ledger tucked behind the napkin dispenser, June's, he knew, where she marked the regulars' orders in looping script. He'd seen her consult it before filling a coffee cup, like she was checking scripture. She'd once told him she didn't trust computers. "Ink remembers better," she said. Ryan leaned in now, his hand brushing the inside of Maddie's wrist as she reached for her fork. Her eyes widened just enough to register the touch, then softened in that practiced way Nolan remembered too well. The look that said, "This moment is just for you," even if it wasn't. She was good at that. She always had been. He turned and left before she saw him. Outside, the morning had brightened, the sun cutting through the haze like it had somewhere to be. Nolan walked the sidewalk slowly, his breath fogging in the cool air. He passed the faded mural on the side of the hardware store, the one they'd painted back in high school. A cornfield, a river, a sky too blue to be real. Maddie's brushstroke was still visible in the corner, initials carved into the fence post she'd added on a whim. He didn't look at it. Back at his house, Nolan sat at the kitchen table and unfolded the policy. The date in the top corner was nearly 6 years old. Effective coverage. Dependent status. Madeline Landry. He'd updated it after their divorce because the clinic had required a new signature, but she'd never followed through on her end. And somehow, over time, it had just remained. She hadn't asked him to keep her on. She hadn't thanked him either. It was just one of those things, like the mail forwarding he never canceled, the prescription renewals that still arrived in his name, the emergency contact forms that no one ever bothered to update. He was the quiet net beneath her life, invisible but intact. And now she sat in their booth, smiling at someone else over a slice of peach pie like it had always been hers. He opened the side drawer beneath the phone and pulled out a small stack of envelopes. Past statements, clinic letters, HR summaries. Nothing dramatic, nothing scandalous. Just paper, ink and dates and little institutional confirmations that told a different story than the one Maddie liked to tell. He laid them out in rows, smoothing each one flat. Then he reached for a yellow legal pad and began to make a list. Not of grievances, that would have been easy. No, Nolan wrote dates, names of departments, contact points, effective terms. He underlined phrases like dependent eligibility confirmation and audit threshold and retroactive review. He didn't feel angry, not exactly. It was something quieter, something cleaner. Later that afternoon, June Hart would find a photograph in her apron pocket. It was old, taken just outside the diner, Maddie in a sundress, Nolan beside her, both of them holding to-go cups and laughing at something just out of frame. June would run her thumb along the edge of the image, then slip it into the back of her ledger without a word. That night, Nolan would sit alone at his kitchen table, the legal pad beside him, the insurance policy folded once more and placed carefully in the center. There was a difference between being forgotten and being erased. He intended to make that difference known. Final payment. The next morning, Nolan rose early, the kind of early that made the world feel half-formed. Light hadn't quite made up its mind about the sky yet. He brewed coffee with the same mechanical precision he always had, 2 scoops, slow pour, no sugar. The apartment was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the soft rustle of paper as he laid out the legal pad again, now marked with check marks in the margin. He started with the accounts. The joint checking account had technically been dormant for over a year, but it still sat there, quietly accruing service fees and offering the illusion of connection. Nolan signed into the portal, double-checked the routing number, then clicked through to request closure. A small pop-up asked if he'd like to download the final statement. He did. Then he printed it, slid it into a manila folder, and wrote the word "closed" across the top in ballpoint pen. Next was the credit card Maddie had once used for gas and groceries. He'd left it open, mostly out of inertia, but the card had remained in his drawer, untouched. Still, the account showed her name as an authorized user. He stared at the screen for a moment before clicking Remove Authorized User. The confirmation email arrived seconds later. He printed that too. By the time the sun cleared the rooftops across the street, Nolan had compiled a small pile of documents, termination notices, confirmation emails, final statements. He wasn't in a hurry. Each step was deliberate, not out of sentimentality, but because the ritual mattered. There was a kind of satisfaction in the rhythm. Click, print, file, label. He reached into the bottom drawer of the desk and pulled out his old checkbook. The cover was worn at the corners, the leather soft from years of being carried in a back pocket. Most of the checks were unused. He flipped to the last one, tore it free, and wrote the word "void" in large, clean letters across the front. Then, almost without thinking, he reached for the corner and tore it off the upper right, just enough to leave the check incomplete, unredeemable. He placed the triangle of paper on the desk and stared at it. A remnant. A marker. He opened the drawer again and took out the small rubber stamp he'd ordered a few months back when he was helping Mark organize some tax documents. It hadn't been used since. The stamp read, "Void" in clean capital letters. He pressed it into the ink pad, then stamped the corner of his legal pad, just once. Void. It left a neat, authoritative impression. Satisfied, he placed the stamp beside the check stub and the paper corner, aligning them like pieces on a board. The act wasn't dramatic. It didn't need to be. It was enough that he knew what they meant. By mid-morning, he was in his car, windows cracked, phone resting in the cradle above the dashboard. He dialed Claire Devlin's direct line. She answered on the third ring. "Claire Devlin, HR Operations." "It's Nolan Pierce," he said. "I'd like to schedule a review of dependent eligibility on my health plan." Claire was quiet for a beat. "You're the primary on the Pierce Landry file?" "I am." "You're still listing a dependent?" "I am," he said evenly. "I'd like to initiate a formal audit." Claire was not one for small talk. "You'll need to submit the request in writing. I'll email you the form. Once we receive it, we'll begin the verification process. That includes documentation from both parties. If there's a mismatch in status or coverage history, we're required to suspend claims until clarification is provided." "I understand. You should also know that if the dependent's status was misrepresented, there may be backbilling, possibly repayment of claims." "That's fine," he said. She paused. "You're aware this could result in coverage being suspended?" "I am." Another pause. "All right. I'll send the form to your email. Anything else?" "No," Nolan said. "Thank you." He ended the call and sat back, watching a pair of sparrows land on the curb outside the bank across the street. He wasn't in a hurry to move. The sun had warmed the dashboard, and the air smelled faintly of dry leaves and exhaust. His phone buzzed again. This time, it was Mark. "Hey," his brother said, voice already uneasy. "Got your message. You all right?" "I'm fine." "You sure? Because initiating a trust and closing accounts sounds like you're either prepping for a lawsuit or a disappearance." Nolan almost smiled. "Neither." Mark exhaled heavily. "Look, I get it. She took you for granted. Hell, I was around. I saw the way she leaned on you when it suited her and vanished when it didn't. But this feels like you're aiming at something, and I don't know if that's good." "I'm not angry," Nolan said quietly. "Doesn't mean you're not sharp enough to do damage." There was a pause. Mark softened. "I'm just saying, this stuff, it doesn't stay clean. Even if you've got every document, every timestamp, someone always gets splashed. And you're not the kind of guy who enjoys watching someone squirm." Nolan looked down at the paper triangle on the passenger seat. "I'm not enjoying it." "Then why do it?" "Because she wrote me out of the story. But I was the one paying for the pen." Mark was silent. "I'm not trying to humiliate her," Nolan added. "I'm just correcting the record." "Records don't cry," Mark muttered. "People do." Nolan didn't respond. "I'll say this once," Mark continued. "If you go through with this, you're going to lose some things you don't get back. Not just her. People talk. They'll pick sides. And small towns don't forget." "I know." "Then do what you have to do. Just don't pretend it's nothing." Nolan ended the call without saying goodbye. Back in his apartment, he opened his laptop and drafted the trust document. It wasn't elaborate, just a personal fund, shielded from joint liability, designated for future medical expenses and legal protection. He wasn't hiding money. He was drawing a line. He sent the file to his attorney with a note, "Please review, need this finalized by end of month." Then he returned to the paper. He laid out the check stub, the void stamp, the torn corner. He pressed the stamp once more onto the legal pad, just below the last item on the list. Void. He stared at the word. Not erased, not forgotten. Just no longer valid. He folded the legal pad closed and placed it atop the growing stack of manila folders, each one labeled, each one quietly definitive. Outside, the wind picked up, rustling the trees along the sidewalk. Nolan watched the leaves scatter for a long time, before turning off the desk lamp and walking away. Final payment. The next morning, Nolan woke early, not by alarm, but by the kind of quiet that had weight in it. He brewed coffee and sat in the stillness of his kitchen, letting the steam rise while he reviewed the list again. No more hypothetical. The folders were real now. The evidence wasn't scattered. It was organized, cross-referenced, and ready. He started with the paper, the tangible weight of it. He opened the drawer that had become a quiet archive of his own erasure. Appointment cards addressed to Maddie but billed to his plan, pharmacy receipts with his group number, envelopes with his address, but her name. He worked methodically, placing each item into the appropriate folder: medical, insurance, dependent verification, social. Every stapled corner, every date-stamped line was a pin in the map of their unspoken arrangement. By mid-morning, he was at the local insurer's field office. The building was squat and beige, tucked between a dry cleaner and a shuttered travel agency. Inside, fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and the chairs were the same plastic kind they had always been, built for waiting, not comfort. Claire Devlin was already at the reception desk, clipboard in hand, her expression unreadable as usual. "You said you had something," she said without looking up. Nolan nodded and passed her a folder. "Full payment history from the last 5 years, all under my name." She was listed as dependent throughout. Claire flipped through the pages with the same deliberate pace she used when reviewing expense reports, slow enough to catch mistakes, fast enough to suggest she wouldn't wait for excuses. "She's still listed as your dependent?" "Not anymore. I filed termination of coverage last week, effective next cycle." Claire raised an eyebrow. "You backdated it?" "No. I let it run through the billing period. Nothing retroactive. I know the rules." She gave a short nod, satisfied. "And this?" She tapped the folder. "Just documentation. I want an audit initiated on her enrollment record. Verification of eligibility. Documentation of dependent status. Usage. Full scope." Claire looked up at him fully now, her eyes sharp behind square lenses. "You realize what that triggers?" I do. If she can't verify dependent status, coverage gets suspended, claims get held, back billing possible. That's not a small thing, Nolan. He didn't blink. I'm not asking for special treatment, just for the system to do what it's supposed to. Claire studied him for a moment longer, then nodded once. I'll initiate the audit. You'll get a notice of pending investigation. We'll send her the same. If she doesn't respond, it proceeds automatically. Good, she paused. And the timing? I want the notice dated but not sent until I confirm. I'll give you the green light. Claire raised an eyebrow again. You're scheduling this? I'm coordinating it, he said evenly. She didn't ask why. She just wrote something on her clipboard and handed him a form. Sign here to authorize. Standard audit release. You'll be CC'd on correspondence. He signed. On his way out, he passed June Hart in the parking lot. She was holding a slim ledger and a styrofoam cup of coffee. You're early, she said, handing him the ledger. You're precise, he replied. June gave a faint smile. That's why I still do payroll on paper. Memory sticks, but ink doesn't flinch. He opened the ledger. It was her copy of the diner's tip-out logs and shift assignments. Maddie's name was there, scribbled in loops and hearts every week for the past year. Shift times, signature initials, some with little notes. Ryan picked up, swapped with Tessa, called out, migraine. Useful? June asked. Nolan nodded. Very. She didn't ask why, just sipped her coffee and said, You remember what I said. Truth doesn't always clean well. I'm not trying to clean it, he said, just to show where the dirt is. June didn't smile this time. She just turned and walked away. He sat in his car for a long time after that. The folder from Claire was on the passenger seat, the ledger on top of it. He reached into the glove compartment and pulled out an old photo, one of the few he hadn't thrown away. It was the two of them at the state fair, Maddie holding a lemon shake-up, Nolan with his arm around her, both of them sunburned and grinning. The kind of image that made people say, what a great couple, without knowing anything else. He stared at it for a while, then he tore it clean down the middle. Her side fluttered to the floor of the car. His side, he folded once, then tucked into the back of the final folder. Inside the folder were the last 3 check stubs, all marked void in red ink. He pulled out the stamp one more time and pressed it hard into the paper. Final. He whispered the word like a benediction. Not for her. For the part of himself that had waited, that had hoped she'd acknowledge the quiet labor, that she'd say thank you, or I'm sorry, or even just admit that he'd been there. But that man, patient, forgiving, quietly proud, was done. Nolan sat in silence, his hands still on the folder. The car was warm with late morning sun, but he felt cold in the chest. Not empty, sharper than that. Like the wind had changed direction inside him. Old self-loyal, enduring died when he saw her smile across that diner booth like nothing had ever been shared. When he saw her hand on Ryan's and realized she'd told a story that ended where her comfort began. No more waiting, no more quiet accommodations. Only one question now. Not if she paid, but how completely. Something inside broke. But broken things make sharp edges. He reached into the center console and pulled out the small black envelope he'd prepared the night before. Inside were the signed authorizations for audit, the request for dependent status review, and the notification timing directive. He sealed it and wrote Claire's name in block letters across the front. He'd drop it off on his way out of town. No email, no timestamp until he said so. Above him, a plane traced a white line across the sky, slow and indifferent. He watched it for a moment, then turned the key in the ignition. As the engine hummed to life, Nolan didn't feel triumphant, but he felt certain. The clock had started ticking, the fuse had been lit, and somewhere, not far away, Maddie Landry was still smiling in a booth she didn't own, writing her version of the story, unaware that the footnotes were about to speak. Final payment. The first time Nolan checked her feed that week, Maddie had posted a filtered photo of a peach pie half-eaten, captioned, Sunday Traditions. The booth was visible in the corner of the frame's same angle, same light through the glass. Ryan's elbow just barely in shot. She knew exactly what she was doing. The comments were full of hearts and you two, and one from someone named Kelsey. Still your spot, huh? Nolan didn't react. He saved the photo, renamed the file, verification, just timestamp, Sunday, and moved it into the folder titled Sequence. He spent the next few days in a pattern that felt like ritual. Coffee alone at the counter of the hardware store cafe. A walk past the clinic where Maddie worked, noting the posted hours and any changes. A quick scan through the employee portal, no changes to the HR contact list, still listing family medical coverage under Ryan's name. He'd already confirmed the overlap. The paper trail was complete. Now he waited, like a match held just above the wick. June Hart met him outside the diner on Wednesday morning. She wore her usual tan jacket, the one with the frayed cuffs, and carried a small shoulder bag that held more than it looked like it could. "You sure about this?" she asked, not as challenge, but as calibration. Nolan nodded once. "I'll be across the street. Booth 7's still their usual?" June's face didn't change. "Still. She always sits facing the window. Likes to be seen." He handed her the envelope, thin and black. "Don't open it, just slide it under the sugar caddy when they get up. I'll signal when." She took it and tucked it into her bag. "You get the picture?" "I will." She gave a small nod, then turned and walked inside, already part of the scenery. Nolan crossed to the drugstore lot and slid into the front seat of his car. From there, he could see the window clearly. The glass threw back reflections of the street, but if you knew the angles, you could watch the whole dance. He sat in the car for an hour, no movement yet, just the low churn of traffic and the occasional bark of laughter from inside. He didn't listen to music. He didn't check his phone. He watched the booth like a hunter watching a trail, waiting for the brush to stir. That afternoon, he met Mark and the lawyer in a small office above the old bank building. The lawyer, a woman with tired eyes and a voice like paper being folded, laid out the documents one at a time. "This one finalizes the trust," she said. "Once signed, the transfer of benefits becomes irrevocable. The fax to HR and the clinic is scheduled for Friday morning, precisely 9:15. That gives them time to open, log, and act before the weekend. You understand the implications?" "I do," Nolan said. Mark leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Nolan, listen, I've stayed out of this. I've let you work your way through it. But this is something else." Nolan didn't look up. Mark gestured to the stack. "You're not just burning the bridge. You're building a bonfire and inviting the town. Once this hits, HR will pull her records. The clinic could suspend her. Insurance might backbill claims. Ryan will walk. And you won't get to be anonymous. People will talk. They'll pick sides." "I know." The lawyer slid the final page forward. "This is the delivery authorization. Once you sign, I send the notice to Claire. She'll process the dependent audit. The timing directive ensures the envelope arrives at the diner during their usual visit. It's surgical." Mark stood. "Don't do this." Nolan finally looked up. "You think I haven't thought it through? I think you're so deep in the planning, you can't see what it'll cost." "It already cost me." Mark walked to the window, then turned back. "You're not this guy. You were the one who always fixed things quietly, who didn't make scenes." Nolan stood, calm and deliberate. "That man let himself be erased. You're not fixing anything. You're blowing it up. I'm making sure the truth has a timestamp." Mark stepped forward and grabbed Nolan's wrist just as he reached for the pen. "If you do this, there's no going back. You'll lose whatever goodwill you've got left. You'll become the guy who mailed a bomb in a black envelope." Nolan looked at his brother's hand, then at the pen. "Let go." Mark didn't move. "Please." Nolan's voice was quiet but final. "She told a story that made me a ghost. I'm just giving the ghost a name." He signed the authorization. Mark let go. "Then I can't watch." "You don't have to." The lawyer pressed her stamp onto the bottom of the page. The sound was soft but final, like a gavel in miniature. The next morning, Nolan sat in the car again. Same lot, same view. June had texted him 20 minutes earlier. "They're in booth 7. She's wearing the red scarf." He waited until their plates were mostly cleared. Maddie laughed at something. Ryan leaned back, arm over the booth, like he'd earned the right to sprawl. Nolan gave the signal, just a nod, as June looked up from the register line. She moved with practiced ease, envelope out of the bag, hand low, slide under the caddy like she was adjusting a napkin. She didn't linger, walked out, caught his eye, and kept going. A minute later, Maddie reached for the sugar. Her hand paused. She pulled the envelope free, stared at it. Her expression didn't change, not right away. Ryan leaned in. She turned it over. Nolan raised the camera, silent shutter. One photo. black envelope. Her fingers on the corner, Ryan's eyes already narrowing. He didn't wait to see what happened next. He started the car and drove away, the folder still on the passenger seat beside him. Inside it, a copy of the same envelope. The same documents. Final. He didn't feel proud, but he felt clean. And somewhere behind him, the sugar caddy sat askew on a Formica table, and the story Maddie had written was starting to unravel, one notarized line at a time. Final payment. The silence at booth 7 cracked first. A fork slipped from Maddie's hand, clattering against the ceramic plate. Not loud, not dramatic. But in that diner, where the rhythms of breakfast had their own hum, it was enough to pivot heads. Ryan's brow furrowed. He picked up the envelope she'd placed on the table, now opened and partially unfolded. The first page, the notarized termination, was tilted toward him. He read quickly, lips moving slightly, eyes darting. "What is this?" he asked, voice low but tight. Maddie didn't answer. Her fingers were frozen in a half curl, hovering above the second page. She looked like she hadn't blinked. Ryan pulled the rest of the contents into view. 3 sheets, crisp. The embossed seal on the top one still raised. A printout from the insurer's audit office, dated 5 days prior, with a subject line in bold, Dependent Eligibility Termination Confirmation. Below that, a table of coverage dates and a red-stamped note, Pending Back Billing Assessment. He flipped to the next page. A timeline. Nolan's name at the top, then a neat column of entries. Payment records, screenshots of recurring transfers, tax forms. Cross-referenced with social media, posts photos of Maddie at conferences labeled self-made. Interviews where she'd spoken about starting from scratch. Each entry had a date, each one a contradiction. "Jesus," Ryan muttered. Across the room, June poured a refill at booth 3 without looking up, but her body was still enough to listen. "Is this a joke?" Ryan asked, louder now. Maddie finally moved. She reached for the papers, but he held them just out of reach. "Tell me this isn't real," he said. Her mouth opened, then closed. She tried again. "It's complicated." Ryan stared at her. "No, it's not. You said you handled it. You said everything was clean. Why are there payments from his account on your tax filings?" She reached for a thread. "It was just paperwork, leftover. I didn't even know." "Bullshit," he snapped. "There's a termination date on here. Last week. You were still listed as a dependent. You told me the clinic plan was yours." She looked down, voice dropping. "It was easier to leave it. It didn't mean anything." "Didn't mean anything?" He laughed once, a short, stunned exhale. "You used his benefits, his address. You built a whole image on being this solo act. And the whole time, he was still underwriting your life." A baby fussed in the next booth. The mother hushed it, eyes flicking toward the scene. Ryan leaned back, rubbing his face. "You lied to me. You lied to everyone." "I didn't," she started. "Don't," he cut in. "Just don't." He stood, slow, folded the papers with deliberate care. Set them back on the table, aligned with the edge. Then he looked at her, really looked and shook his head. "I defended you," he said, "when people hinted, when Claire raised flags. I thought they just didn't get you. Turns out they saw clearer than I did." Maddie reached out. "Ryan," he stepped back. "I'll be at my place. Don't call." And then he walked out. The bell above the door gave a tired chime. Inside, the air seemed to compress. Conversations shrank. Forks paused mid-air. June moved behind the counter again, but this time she watched openly. Maddie sat frozen, red scarf slack at her collarbone. She picked up the envelope, held it like it might leak something. Her eyes moved across the pages again, but slower now. Each word seemed to land harder. A minute passed, then another. The server approached cautiously with the check. She started to set it down, then hesitated. Maddie didn't look up. The server left it anyway. At the far end of the diner, the front door opened again. Nolan walked in. He didn't go to the counter, didn't look for June. He walked straight to booth 7, a single folded slip in his hand. Maddie looked up as he approached. Her expression flickered. Recognition, then disbelief, then something harder. He didn't speak, just reached forward and placed the slip on top of the check. A receipt. Printed cleanly, black ink on white. Restaurant logo at the top, time-stamped to that morning. and beneath the line item for coffee, final payment. She stared at it. He turned and walked out. No drama, no parting line. Just the scrape of his boots on tile, and then the hush of the door behind him. Outside, the sun had climbed higher. The parking lot shimmered faintly, heat pooling on the asphalt. Nolan didn't pause. He unlocked the car, slid in, and pulled out without looking back. Inside the diner, Maddie still hadn't moved. The receipt sat atop the envelope, like punctuation. June walked over, not rushed, not slow. She cleared the empty plate, refilled the water, and said nothing. Maddie finally spoke. "You knew." June looked at her. "I know a lot of things." Maddie's voice cracked. "You could have warned me." June's face didn't change. "You wrote your version. He just corrected the footnotes." Then she walked away. At the clinic, 2 blocks east, a fax machine beeped once, then again. A staffer pulled the page, read the audit notification, and frowned. She flagged the account. A hold was placed on the upcoming refill order. A note was added. Coverage status in question, pending HR confirmation. At Maddie's office, Claire Devlin opened her inbox. One message marked time sensitive. She read it twice, her lips pressed into a line. She opened the HR portal, pulled the dependent enrollment file, and began typing a flag note. Subject line: Enrollment integrity review requested. Immediate. Across town, a few phones buzzed. Not many, just enough. A text from Ryan to a friend. Turns out she was still on his plan. Years. A post on the local community board. Anyone know what happened at the diner this morning? Something went down at booth 7. The ripples began. Not a wave, not yet. But the surface had broken, and Nolan, driving with the windows down, didn't check his phone. Didn't need to. The trap had sprung, and the story, the real one, had begun to write itself, unraveling. The clinic lobby was quiet except for the low hum of the vending machine and the soft clatter of the receptionist's keyboard. Maddie stood at the counter, her smile a little too bright, her sunglasses still perched in her hair, like she hadn't expected to stay long. "Hi, I just need to pick up a refill. It should be ready, Lexapro, 90-day supply." The receptionist, a young woman with tired eyes and chipped pink polish, typed a few strokes, then frowned slightly. "What's the birth date?" Maddie gave it, cheerfully. The woman paused. 1 moment." She turned in her chair and rolled back to a printer, flipping through a short stack of freshly printed forms. She pulled one out, read it, then swiveled back. "I'm sorry," she said, voice now more cautious. "There's a temporary hold on your account. Something about coverage status. It says we can't fill the prescription until the suspension's reviewed." Maddie blinked. "That can't be right. I've been coming here for years." "I know," the woman said gently, eyes flicking to the monitor again. "But the system's flagged it this morning. It says dependent status under review by HR. If you want, I can give you a copy of the note." "No, Maddie forced a laugh. "I'll just call Claire. It's probably a mix-up." The receptionist gave a small nod, but her expression didn't change. There was a pause, it too long, and then Maddie stepped away from the counter, her phone already in hand. Claire didn't answer the first time, or the second. Maddie left a voicemail, then another, then finally, just before dialing again, her screen lit up with an incoming call. "Claire," she said, forcing lightness. "Hi, Madeline," Claire said, crisp as always. "I'm in the middle of something. What's going on?" "I just stopped by the clinic for a refill and they said there's a hold, something about a review. That's got to be a mistake." There was a pause on the other end, a kind of silence that wasn't empty but full of sorting. "The audit notice came through this morning," Claire said. "Third-party verification flagged a dependent inconsistency. According to the records, you were enrolled as a domestic partner under Nolan Pierce's plan, but no supporting documentation has been updated since 2019. Per protocol, that triggers a coverage suspension pending verification." Maddie's stomach dropped. "Wait, what?" "That's Claire. I haven't been with Nolan in years." "Then you should have removed yourself from his benefits file," Claire said, still calm but edged now. "HR doesn't monitor personal relationships. We rely on self-reporting. But now that the discrepancy's been formally raised, we're obligated to investigate." "Formally raised by who?" Claire didn't answer that. Instead, she said, "You'll be receiving a written notice by the end of the day. In the meantime, All non-emergency services are suspended until eligibility is confirmed or corrected. If you have out-of-pocket receipts, you can submit them for review after resolution. I can't afford to just... Maddie stopped herself, eyes darting to the receptionist, who was now very pointedly not looking at her. You can appeal, Claire said, but you'll need to submit documentation, proof of current partnership status, or a formal request to terminate the dependent listing retroactively. Though I should caution you, back billing may apply. Back what? If you were ineligible for coverage during the period in question, the insurer may request reimbursement for services rendered. Maddie felt her knees weaken. This is insane. I didn't even know I was still on his plan. Then you'll want to say that in writing. I'm hanging up now. Claire, please. But the line was already dead. Maddie stood there, phone slack in her hand, and felt the air shift. The receptionist glanced over, then quickly away. A man near the door, waiting for a blood draw, tapped something into his phone without looking up. She left the clinic without speaking to anyone else. By the time she reached her car, Ryan had already texted. You should have told me. She stared at it for a full minute before replying. Told you what? The response was swift. That you were still on Nolan's insurance. That you never took yourself off. What the hell, Maddie? I didn't even know I was still on it. I thought it ended years ago. Another pause. You thought? She started typing, erased it, started again. Nolan handled all that stuff. I never asked him to keep me on. He must have just not updated it. So it's his fault you've been using his benefits for years? I didn't use them, not on purpose. No reply. She called, voicemail. Another text appeared a minute later. I need space. She sat in her car, staring through the windshield at nothing. The sun was bright and meaningless. Somewhere in the recesses of her purse, her phone buzzed again. Another notification. This one from June. No message, just a photo. It was a shot of the diner from that morning, Maddie in the booth, Nolan visible in the background, walking away. The timestamp was embedded in the corner. On the screen, a yellow sticky note had been photographed beside it. In June's handwriting, every story has footnotes. You just never read yours. Maddie's breath caught. She zoomed in. Nolan was already halfway to the door. The envelope still sat on the table. She remembered the moment, remembered thinking it was just odd. Final payment. What had that even meant? Now she knew. Her inbox dinged. A forwarded email from the HR office. Subject: Dependent Eligibility Audit. Interim Suspension. Attached were 2 PDFs. One was the standard notification letter. The other was a scanned copy of the original enrollment form, signed in blue ink her name, listed as domestic partner, effective date 5 years prior. There was a red stamp across the top. Under review, initiated by third party. She scrolled down. At the bottom of the second page, a footnote. This review was initiated based on documentation submitted by Nolan Pierce, including notarized termination of relationship and confirmation of non-cohabitation, dated June of last year. June. Of course. Maddie felt her stomach turn. She opened her social media app. Notifications were already piling in. A few innocuous someone liked a photo. Someone tagged her in a memory. But then a comment on her latest post, the one from that morning. Beautiful morning, with my favorite person in my favorite booth. Someone had replied, wonder if your favorite person knows who's been paying for your health care. Another, the truth always comes out, huh? The post had nearly a dozen comments now. Half of them were veiled, but unmistakable. The local board had picked it up too. A thread titled, Diner Drama, Booth 7 Blues, was climbing fast. She clicked. The first post was a blurry photo of her and Ryan with a caption, Things got real weird after this. Anyone know what happened? She tried to post a response. Just want to clarify, this was a misunderstanding. I had no idea I was still listed under Nolan's plan. We haven't been together in years. I've never used it intentionally, working with HR now to fix it. She hit send. It posted. But the reply came quick. Never used it intentionally is doing a lot of work here. Girl, you've been going to that clinic for years. Was the peach pie worth it? The last one was from someone she didn't know. But it stung the most. She closed the app. Her hands were shaking. At yoga that evening, her mat sat empty. At brunch the next morning, her usual table was full, but not with her. She walked in, saw the sidelong glances, the quick hush that spread like static. June was there, sipping coffee, reading something folded in thirds. She didn't look up. Maddie turned and walked out. Back at home, the envelope still sat on her kitchen counter. She hadn't opened it yet. She did now. Inside, a copy of the termination form, notarized. A copy of the audit request with Nolan's signature. A printout of her last 5 clinic visits, each billed under his plan. A sticky note in his handwriting, clipped to the top. No need to reply. This is just the paperwork catching up to the story. She sat on the floor, legs folded under her, holding the pages. After a long while, she whispered, "How long have you known?" No one answered, but the answer was there, in the ink, the stamps, the dates. He had known for months, had planned this for months. Every smile at the grocery store, every silence at the diner, every unopened envelope. She wasn't caught, she was outplayed, and the town knew it. Punctuation. A week later, the wind had turned. It came sharper off the lake, curling under coat collars and chasing dry leaves across the diner parking lot. Nolan stood by the door a moment longer than needed, watching his reflection in the glass. The bell above the entrance gave its usual tired chime as he stepped inside. The morning crowd was thinning. 2 booths were occupied by retirees nursing bottomless coffee. A pair of teenagers shared a cinnamon roll in the corner, and June Hart was behind the counter, wiping down the register with the kind of deliberate rhythm that made it clear she'd been watching the door for a while. Nolan walked straight to booth 7, no hesitation, no glancing around. The seat was empty, but it hadn't been cleared since someone last left a folded napkin and a coffee ring. He sat, pulled a plain envelope from his coat pocket, and set it neatly in the center of the table. Inside was a single thermal receipt, trimmed and flattened, with the words "Final Payment" typed in bold at the bottom. Below that, a typed note on white printer paper, centered and clean. "This table is settled. No further service required." He smoothed the envelope once with the flat of his palm, then stood. June appeared beside him, as if conjured, drying her hands on a dish towel that had seen better years. She didn't ask if he wanted anything. She just looked at the envelope, then at him. "You want me to clear it?" she asked. "No," he said. "Let it be." She nodded once, the kind of nod that carried years of unspoken agreements. "You know people are going to ask." "They will," he said. "I'm not answering." June looked down at the envelope again. "You sure about that?" "I am." He turned to leave, but she called after him. "Pie's fresh today." He stopped, hand on the door. The bell hadn't rung yet. He didn't turn around. "I know," he said, "but I'm done eating here." The bell gave its small metallic sigh as the door opened and closed. Outside, the wind had picked up again, tugging at his coat hem as he crossed the lot. He didn't look back. Inside, June took the envelope and slid it just slightly to the side, aligning it with the edge of the salt shaker. She didn't open it, didn't read it, but she left it there. When the lunch crowd came, she steered them to other booths with a quiet, "That one's reserved," and no further explanation. By Friday, people had stopped asking. The envelope remained for a while. First a curiosity, then a fixture. Eventually, someone slipped it into a clear plastic sleeve and tacked it to the wall above the booth, behind the menu specials board. No one said who. No one needed to. Maddie didn't come back. Ryan was seen twice more, alone, once with a to-go cup and once just driving by. The whispers dulled, but never quite vanished. The town, like most towns, didn't forget, just learned to fold certain stories into the wallpaper. Nolan didn't return to the diner. Not once. He passed it sometimes on the way to the post office or the hardware store, but never slowed. The booth, the pie, the coffee, all stayed behind the glass. He spent more time at the library, refiled old documents, cleaned out drawers, bought a shredder. Mark came by one evening with a 6-pack and didn't ask questions, just sat on the porch and let the silence stretch between them, like rope, taut but unbroken. "You okay?" Mark finally asked. Nolan took a long breath. "I'm clean." "That's not what I asked." "I know," Mark nodded. "You burned it all down." "I did." "You don't regret it?" Nolan didn't answer right away. A car passed on the road below, headlights sweeping briefly across their shoes. "I regret that it was necessary," he said. "But not that I did it." Mark took a sip from his bottle. "That's the difference, I guess." "Yeah." They sat there until the sky turned dark. Later that night, Nolan opened his laptop and deleted a folder marked Maddie. He didn't archive it, didn't back it up, just sent it to the trash and emptied it. He stood by the window for a long time after that, watching the streetlights flicker and the wind bend the trees just slightly. He didn't feel triumphant. He felt finished, and for the first time in years, that was enough.